Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tim, and this is another Real Ideal Gear Review. Today we're going to be looking at the Sugess SU001. It looks an awful lot like a Rolex Daytona. It is a very close, some may say a knockoff. I wouldn't say it's a one-for-one copy because there are some things inside here that are very different. There's a lot of things that are the same. So just to kind of get the elephant out of the room out of this particular watch and the design features around this, I don't mind the Homage thing too much when it comes down to buying them, when it comes down to wearing them. You know, the whole argument is based off of the spectrum of qualities. And the more you fine tune or you start to split these qualities and say, well, Rolex has these qualities and Omega has these qualities and Patek Philippe has these qualities and Seiko has these qualities. And nobody can touch them because they're the ones who started this trend. I just think that that's kind of a hypocritical starting point because the very fact that they're all wristwatches is an homage to whomever made the first original wristwatch. And from there forward, you could say that everything is an homage at that point. So logically speaking, it becomes an argument of convenience. So when it comes down to a watch like this Sugess Daytona-esque type watch, I don't have a huge problem with it, partly because it doesn't have the Rolex name on it. They don't have Daytona written on this. They're really not trying to steal the actual name. Certainly fakes. I'm totally against the fakes when they, again, put a name that's not their own on their watch. That crosses the line. Do they have the design features? Sure. So does the Seiko speed timer. And I don't hear a lot of people, wanting the Seiko company on a platter when it comes down to the Seiko speed timer when it looks a lot like, not as much as this one does, but a lot like the Daytona. So to me, it's an argument of convenience. The fact that they have a wristwatch is an homage to other wristwatches just in general. So how you want to split this, I guess, is totally up to you. Also, just another kind of a rebuttal point. If this was such a detriment, you look at Rolex and the number of watches they're putting out and the increase in value, in this case, the Daytona, and you see that in 7 years' time, it's gone up 13% on average. But this hasn't impacted financially Rolex in a way that has caused things to go flat or even in reverse. As a matter of fact, it's a 13% increase in all this. I think what this does is it draws more attention to Rolex and it draws more attention to the Daytona. So I'm in that camp. I'll never afford the Rolex Daytona. It just isn't going to happen. This is as close as I'm going to get. I love the design. It doesn't say Rolex anywhere on here. And so from my perspective, this watch is an homage. And an homage is fine so long as they don't try to be a fake. Because there's homages everywhere. And you want to talk about like design features. Let's talk about the internal workings of a automatic movement and see who is homaging who when it comes down to these movements. And we don't see a lot of that being published either. So I just think it's the kettle calling the pot black when it comes down to this whole homage argument. So that's my take on it. Let's get into the review of this watch. And let's talk about the Sugess and what is in this watch, what makes it look good, how I've used it, and what I expect to use this watch for in the future. So I go through the 5 things: size, fitment, finish, accuracy, then legibility and lume. So let's get into size. This is a 40mm case, and it's like an average size case for a person who has an average size wrist. I think it'll fit the larger wrist within reason. If you have an extra large wrist, maybe not, although I took out 4 links out of this bracelet to make this watch fit. And when I did that, I actually ended up with a watch that fit really well. I didn't have to use any of the micro adjusts internally on the clasp. We'll talk about that in fitment. But as far as the size goes, huge bracelet that comes with this. The diameter of the watch itself is nice, 40 millimeters. Height off the wrist is about 12.5 millimeters. So it's a automatic movement, so it's going to take up some space. It's not a quartz. But I think the bracelet is great. I think the size, the overall balance of the watch head and the bracelet and the clasp all work together to keep kind of just a real good balance on your wrist. It's stainless steel. It's going to have some weight to it and some mass to it. As far as fitment goes, screw-in links. You have internal micro adjusts on the clasp. You have a friction clasp as well, safety clasps, which I'm not a huge fan of friction clasps. I would rather have the push button dual push button release on the clasp. I just think it's more secure that way. The friction clasps tend to wear out over time. That's just my complaint on that. Overall, I think it's a very comfortable watch. I think the bracelet is very well designed with the polish, and that we'll get into that in the finish of it. But it also tapers. So the bracelet tapers from the widest point, which I believe is 20 millimeters. I'll make sure I'll verify that down below here in the video. But it tapers down, so you get a nice, comfortable fitting bracelet. It's not something that starts out at the lugs and continues the same width all the way around. So I like that. So the fitment-wise, this watch fits great. It balances great. The size is great. The overall wearability of this watch, I think, is fantastic for anybody with, you know, maybe below average to above average. If you're in the small category or the extra large category, this might be a watch to kind of keep in mind as far as just like, you know, finding other people with the similar size wrist and see how they like it. Finish. The finish on this watch is outstanding. High polish center link on the bracelet. You have high polish all the way around the case. So that much I think is just outstanding. You've got great pushers, polished. You've got a signed crown. These are screwed in pushers, by the way, so it helps with the water resistance. The finish of the dial, I love the finish of the dial. You have a white face, you have the panda rings that go around the 3 sub-dials. You have the applied hour markers, you have a minute track, and in between each minute you have 1/5 of a minute markers, which kind of doesn't make sense because this is a 4K movement, so you have 8 ticks per second. Doesn't match up with 1/5 of a second, but hey, it looks cool, right? And who's gonna be able to read the chronograph secondhand based off of 1/5 of a second? Like just the perspective of where your eye is in relationship to the watch face, and you change it just a little bit, and you can actually perspective-wise have that chronograph secondhand move to a different spot on that 1/5 of the marker scale. The sub-dials, great. You have the 3 sub-dials that are outlined in black that are sunburst finished. So they have this like sunburst that goes around the black dial, which I absolutely love that. You have high polished hands with a little bit of lume in the middle on the hour hand and the minute hand. The second hand is high polished with an arrow tip on the end to really help it stand out. When it comes down to legibility, this becomes a little bit of an issue, but we'll talk about that in just a minute. But the 3 sub-dials, let's go over those, the finish on those. It's the white center. You have the polished center hands. They look great. I think they stand out more than the black dial version. So you have the black dial version with the white rings, the reverse panda. And I found when I was just looking at that and looking at other watches that I had that had high polished hands, I think high polished hands tend to disappear even more easily on a dark dial, like a black dial, than they do on a white dial. There's just a little bit. There's more of a metal surface, I think, to contrast against the white dial when you have that on the hands. So, you know, it is what it is. The hands are somewhat thin, and so it makes, you know, reading the watch a little bit more difficult. But the finishing on the hands is great. Great high polish. In the sunlight, you do get a little bit of reflection off of the hands and the second hand and the hour markers. Not a lot, but you get enough to where you get a little bit of a flash. So it's not too flashy in that sense. It's not like it's faceted in a way that looks like it's a diamond reflection in a way. So that I think is great. The bezel, it's a ceramic bezel with the white inlaid numbers and markers. It's great. I love this. I love the finishing of this watch. I think it's great. You know, is it the finishing of a Chinese watch, Sugess watch? Absolutely. It's not perfect, but it is really, really good. I like it. I don't, you know, when you have something like this and I don't have a Rolex to compare it to, I think it's great. And that's kind of my whole point from the beginning of the video here was that this is what I know and this is what I can afford. I am 100% satisfied with it. So the finish I think is outstanding. Accuracy on the time grapher, this did a great job. I'm going to put some video clips up here. What I'm going to put up here is a video clip of the chronograph in action compared to a Casio Pathfinder stopwatch, and just how much over a 10-minute period of time is there any change. And I didn't see any change on there. Now part of this is the refresh rate of the LCD display on my Pathfinder, and so the LCD refresh rate to me didn't show any disparity between what I saw on the chronograph secondhand on the Sugess versus the chronograph output on the display on my Pathfinder. So to me, and I think this is something to kind of keep in mind too, is the accuracy not only of the timekeeping portion of the watch, but also the chronograph keeping of the watch. And so to me, that's awesome. So the chronograph, I think, is fine. I don't think there's any issues with that as far as timekeeping goes. Accuracy of the timekeeping part is just fine. It's well within spec. It's a high beat movement. It's a copy, or it's a version that uses the Valjoux 7750 as its model. And they've done a really good job with it, I think, as far as accuracy goes. And from what I've heard everywhere else, each version that they update on this gets a little bit more accurate. Reliability goes up a little bit. So I think they're doing a great thing when it comes down to that particular movement. It's not a Rolex movement. It is a Chinese movement. And we'll see what the durability is. That's the thing I'm most curious about, because that's what most of these Chinese watches have been working on, and they've gotten better at it. It's just a matter of where do they start. And so from there, I think accuracy is great. Legibility and lume. Legibility, it's a difficult watch to read at times because of the white background, because of the high reflective surfaces on the hour hand, minute hand, and the chronograph second hand. And even the subdial hands sometimes are a little bit more difficult, but not quite as bad. I think the other hands, the minute hand and the hour hand, those are the two that are a little bit more difficult to read. But it's good. Also, lume. Lume is barely there. I mean, it's not poor. And it's not average. It's below average for sure. It's above poor. It lasts probably 20 minutes before it's totally gone, somewhere in there. And so to me, it's like, you charge it up, you're going to get a few minutes out of it of really good legibility. And then after about 5 to 10 minutes in there, it starts to fade pretty quick. It's not nearly as bad as some other watches I reviewed, but it's not that much better either. But keep in mind, this is a sport watch. But this is more of a dress watch. I mean, let's be honest. Like, this is not going to be a dive watch. You're not expecting high degree of lume out of this watch anyway. But it does have some lume, and it does last for, say 10 minutes. That's good. I mean, if you're going to bed and you charge this up, it's not going to be lit up in the middle of the night. But if you're going to bed and 10 minutes later you check the time, you're going to be able to see the time. So in that sense, I think it's pretty good. Water resistance is 100 meters. Again, sapphire crystal, ceramic bezel, screw-in crowns for the chronograph and for the crown itself to adjust the time. I found the crown for the adjusting time to be kind of different. There's like 2 clicks to it. When you unscrew it, it pops, and then you unscrew it just a little bit more and it pops again. And then you can hand wind, hack. That's all there. Setting the time is fine. And then when you're screwing it back in, it's a little bit gritty. Okay, again, you get what you're paying for on this. So that part is fine. I haven't seen any issues with setting the time, especially when you pop that back in. Sometimes the minute hand will move a little bit. I've seen that with some other watches that I have that are cheap. But this one seems to hold the minute hand in position as you pop the crown back in and screw it down. So I like that. What are the conclusions on this? So overall, the ding on this is going to be the legibility and it's going to be the lume. Those are the 2 big ones. The rest of it is really, really good. I mean, this is a really nice watch. It feels great. It operates well. The accuracy is good. The organization is great. I love the dials on here that don't have... One of my pet peeves is a chronograph that has like a 24-hour dial, or a chronograph that has one of the dials is the day of the week. Like, why would you do that? I want to have the running seconds, I want the chronograph seconds, and I want the chronograph elapsed hours. That's what I want. Those are the 3 dials that I want on a chronograph. So this knocks it out of the park for that reason. Overall score for this is going to be a 9.2. Is it a recommend? I highly recommend this. Just be aware of the legibility issue. The lume issue is not as big because it's a dressy watch, so I'm not expecting a lot out of this. There you go. I highly recommend this watch. Don't worry about the homage thing. All watches are homages. And if you start looking at the internal workings of watches, it really gets messy. So let's just all kind of get along when it comes down to the homage and really go after the fake watches. I think the fake watches are where it's at. All right. My name's Tim. This has been another Real Ideal Gear review. We'll catch you guys next time.